I'd like to start by thanking Seyom and Rob Scales, the co-editors of the book, also the American Security Project for hosting this meeting, and Len Novak, who is in the room some over here, who organized all of this and kept us going. And then lastly, in absentia, Jim Hollifield, who's the director of the Tower Center at SMU and the series editor, of which this book is the inaugural edition. Seyom, I'd also like to note that I noted a typo apparently in an email that you sent to us. You said we had 5 minutes, and yet all of us have taught before. We're taught in graduate school only to speak for 50-minute chunks. So I calculate that we'll be here for 7.5 hours. I'm sure all of you look forward to that.
1/10 the usual.
In the 4 minutes I have left, I'd like to comment on really some lessons that can be learned from one war to the other, from Iraq to Afghanistan or vice versa. And I'd like to focus on 4 different aspects of that. First, the so-called light footprint approach. Secondly, the application of the surge of troops in both Afghanistan and Iraq. Third, flipping the Sunni tribesmen in Iraq and the Taliban in Afghanistan. And then lastly, as I think a recognition that the United States enemies have learned from these 2 wars as well, I'd like to focus on improvised explosive devices. And I'll do that very quickly, and we can come back to some of them if you have questions about that. First, on the light footprint approach. I think as all of you realize, the United States invaded Afghanistan on October the 7th, 2001, with a little more than 400 special forces and CIA operatives in Afghanistan. And in a very short period of time, those 400 special operators, working with the Northern Alliance on the ground and American air power, were able to destroy the Al-Qaeda training camps in Afghanistan and to overthrow the Taliban government. That success, remarkable military success, I think led Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld to conclude that his highly touted revolution in military affairs worked, and it worked spectacularly well in Afghanistan. So when the administration then began planning and thinking about invading Iraq, Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld, others in the administration said, well, the light footprint approach worked in Afghanistan, won't it work in Iraq? And contrary to the advice of the top leadership of the Army in particular, and also the Marines, top generals were estimating it would take a minimum of 300,000 forces, up to 500,000 forces to successfully invade Iraq. The administration chose to send 150,000. When that didn't work out so well in Iraq by 2006, President Bush then went back to square one and decided to send another 30,000 American troops to Iraq. And Ambassador Ryan Crocker, whom I interviewed, said that in 2006, the United States was on the verge of defeat in Iraq. The surge turned that around, and while it may not have achieved American victory in Iraq, it did prevent decisive American defeat. President Obama comes into office, and he had been critical of both the involvements of the United States in Afghanistan and Iraq, but after his 6-week study, he concluded, in fact, that a surge could be applied to Afghanistan. So a page was taken out of the Bush administration's playbook in applying the surge to Afghanistan. The other part of the surge, however, was co-opting Sunni tribesmen, flipping them from being opponents to the United States to supporting the United States. And that was successful, largely because of monetary incentives. The United States paid 100,000 Sunni tribesmen $300 a month to essentially not shoot at and kill American and coalition forces. As the United States applied the surge in Afghanistan, the missing piece was flipping American enemies in Afghanistan. And of course, the most likely candidates for being flipped were members of the Taliban. And to date, that's been very problematic. A little more than 3,000 have undergone the sort of re-education programs in Afghanistan, which is far below what the United States was expecting and hoping for. And the last point that I'll make, it refers to improvised explosive devices. IEDs were used first in Iraq, and now they have been used extensively, obviously, in Afghanistan. Essentially, the IED approach was exported from Iraq into Afghanistan. And I think it illustrates the way in which the United States enemies have also learned from these two wars. My bottom line in my writing and my work on this subject is that the two wars are integrally related. They are obviously different, and yet I think future historians, and I think this book illustrates this point pretty well, that the two wars are integrally related, and it's hard to think about one war without considering the other.
Thanks very much, Dan.